The rain was very heavy. Arthur drove his old car slowly along the narrow road. The wind pushed against the windows. It was a dark night, and the tall trees looked like giants in the shadows. Arthur was a retired investigator. He was 60 years old, and he wanted a quiet place to rest. He was tired of the city and tired of mysteries. Finally, he saw a wooden sign. It said Silver Oak Hotel. Arthur turned the car and drove up a long path. At the end of the path, a large building appeared. It was a grand house made of grey stone. It had many tall windows, but only a few lights were on. The hotel looked lonely and old. Arthur parked his car and took his suitcase. He ran to the front door to stay dry. He pushed the heavy wooden door. It opened slowly. Inside, the air smelled like old books and wood smoke. The lobby was very large. There was a big fireplace on one side, but the fire was small and weak. A single lamp sat on a long wooden desk. A man stood behind the desk. He was tall, thin, and very pale. He wore a dark suit that looked too big for him. This was Mr. Gable, the manager of the hotel. He looked at Arthur with cold, grey eyes. He did not smile. "Good evening," Arthur said. "I have a reservation. My name is Arthur King." Mr. Gable looked at a large, leather book on the desk. He moved his finger down the page. "Yes, Mr. King. We expected you. You are our only new guest today. The weather is very bad," Arthur said. He took off his wet hat. "I am happy to be inside. The storm is strong," Mr. Gable replied. His voice was very low and flat. "Silver Oak is a quiet place. We like it that way." Mr. Gable reached for a heavy metal key. It was attached to a piece of wood with the number 201 on it. He handed the key to Arthur. "Your room is on the second floor. Dinner is served in the dining room at 7 o'clock. Please do not be late. We do not like to keep the chef waiting." Arthur took the key. He felt the cold metal in his hand. "Thank you," he said. He walked toward the wide staircase. The stairs were covered in a red carpet that was old and thin. As he climbed the stairs, he looked back at the lobby. Mr. Gable was still standing there. He was watching Arthur. He did not move. He looked like a statue. Arthur reached the second floor. The hallway was long and dark. He found his room and turned the key. The door opened with a slow movement. The room was simple but clean. There was a large bed, a wooden chair, and a window. Arthur went to the window. He looked out into the dark garden. A flash of lightning lit up the sky. For a second, he saw a very large oak tree in the middle of the grass. Its branches looked like long arms. Arthur felt a strange shiver. He told himself it was just the cold rain. He was a man of facts, not a man of ghosts. But as he closed the curtains, he felt that Silver Oak was hiding something. Arthur changed his clothes for dinner. He put on a clean shirt and a blue sweater. He looked in the mirror. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He walked out of his room and went down the stairs. The dining room was at the back of the hotel. It was a very big room with high ceilings. The walls were covered in dark wood. Large windows showed the rain outside. The storm was still strong. The wind pushed against the glass. There were many tables in the room, but most of them were empty. Arthur saw two other people. An old man sat in a corner. He was reading a newspaper and drinking tea. A woman sat near the window. She wore a green dress and looked out at the rain. They did not talk. The room was very quiet. Mr. Gable stood near the door. He pointed to a small table in the center of the room. "Please sit here, Mr. King," he said. Arthur sat down. On his table, there was a white cloth, a plate, and a silver spoon. A waiter brought a bowl of hot vegetable soup. The soup smelled good, but Arthur was not very hungry. He was looking at another table. That table was near the fireplace. It was set for one person. There was a glass of red wine, a piece of bread on a small plate, and a bowl of soup. The soup was steaming hot, but the chair was empty. No one was sitting there. Arthur began to eat his soup. He watched the empty chair. He waited for a guest to walk into the room. 5 minutes passed. Then 10 minutes passed. The woman in the green dress finished her meal and left. The old man folded his newspaper and walked away. Arthur was now alone in the room with Mr. Gable. The empty table stayed the same. The steam stopped rising from the soup. The red wine sat in the glass, but nobody drank it. The bread looked dry. Arthur looked at Mr. Gable. The manager was standing by the wall. He was looking at the empty chair too. His face was very serious. He looked sad, or perhaps he was afraid. "Is someone coming to dinner?" Arthur asked. He pointed at the empty table. Mr. Gable did not look at Arthur. He kept his eyes on the empty chair. "That table is for Mr. Thorne," he said. "Is Mr. Thorne late?" Arthur asked. "Mr. Thorne is a very punctual man," Mr. Gable answered. "He is never late. He has lived here for many years." "Then where is he?" Arthur asked. Mr. Gable finally looked at Arthur. His eyes were dark. "We do not know," he said quietly. "He did not come to breakfast. He did not come to lunch. And now, he is not here for dinner." Mr. Gable walked to the table. He took the cold bowl of soup. He did not say anything else. He walked into the kitchen and closed the door. Arthur sat in the quiet room. The sound of the rain was the only thing he could hear. He looked at the empty chair one last time. A cold feeling moved down his back. A guest was missing, and the hotel felt very heavy with secrets. Arthur finished his dinner, but he did not go to his room. He went back to the lobby. The fire in the fireplace was almost dead now. Only a few orange coals remained. Mr. Gable was sitting at the front desk. He was not reading or writing. He was just staring at the wall. He looked very tired. Arthur walked to the desk. "Mr. Gable," he said softly, "you look worried. Is it because of Mr. Thorne?" Mr. Gable looked up. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Yes, Mr. King. It is very strange. Mr. Thorne is 80 years old. He is a man of habits. Every morning at 8 o'clock, he has coffee. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, he walks in the garden. He never misses a meal. But today, nobody saw him." "Did you knock on his door?" Arthur asked. "I did," Mr. Gable replied. "I knocked many times this morning. I knocked again this afternoon. There was no answer. The door is locked from the inside. I have a master key, but I do not want to go inside without a good reason. Mr. Thorne likes his privacy." Arthur leaned against the desk. He felt his old investigator brain starting to work. A man of 80 years who does not come to dinner is a very good reason. Mr. Gable. He could be sick. He could have fallen down. Mr. Gable nodded slowly. "You are right. I am worried that he is ill. But there is something else. Mr. Thorne is not just a guest. He has lived at Silver Oak for 20 years. He knows this hotel better than I do. He is a very quiet man, but he is also very smart." "Does he have any friends here?" Arthur asked. "Not really," Mr. Gable said. "He talks to Silas, the groundskeeper, sometimes, and he talks to the chef about the food. But mostly, he keeps to himself. He spends a lot of time in the library or the garden." Arthur looked at the grand staircase. Which room is his? Room 302. Mr. Gable answered. It is on the 3rd floor, at the end of the hall. It is the best room in the hotel. It has a view of the old oak tree. Arthur saw a small silver tray on the desk. There was a single key on it. It was the master key. Mr. Gable looked at the key. Then he looked at Arthur. He knew Arthur was a retired investigator. Mr. King, I am a manager, not a detective. Mr. Gable said. His voice trembled a little. I am afraid of what I might find. Will you come with me? I want to check the room now. The storm is getting worse, and I cannot wait until tomorrow. Arthur nodded. Of course. Let's go. Mr. Gable took the master key. His hand was cold and shaking. The two men walked toward the stairs. The hotel was very dark now. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow longer. Arthur felt the mystery growing. A man was missing in a locked room, and the air felt thick with a secret. They reached the 3rd floor and walked to the very end of the long, silent hallway. Arthur and Mr. Gable stood in front of the door. The number 302 was made of gold metal. It shone under the dim lights of the hallway. Mr. Gable put the master key into the lock. He turned it slowly. The door made a low, heavy noise as it opened. The room inside was very dark. Mr. Gable reached for the light switch on the wall and flipped it. The lights came on. The room was very large and beautiful. It had a big bed with a soft blue blanket. There was a wooden desk with many papers and books. On the wall, there were several paintings of the ocean. Everything was in its place. It was a very tidy room. But the air was freezing cold. Arthur looked toward the far wall. Look, he said, pointing his finger. The large window was wide open. The long white curtains were blowing wildly in the wind. Rain was coming inside and making the red carpet very wet. The sound of the wind was loud in the small room. Why is the window open? Mr. Gable asked. He looked shocked. He ran to the window and pulled it shut with a heavy pull. He locked it and wiped the rain from his face with his sleeve. Mr. Thorne always keeps the window closed. He is an old man. He does not like the cold air. Arthur walked to the bed. He touched the blue blanket. It was smooth and cold. The bed is made. Arthur said. Mr. Thorne did not sleep here last night. The pillows are still perfect. Arthur then looked at the desk. There was a pair of reading glasses and an open book. The book was a history of the local area. There was also a small lamp on the desk, but it was turned off. He was here yesterday afternoon. Mr. Gable said. His voice was a whisper. The waiter brought him tea at 4 o'clock. Mr. Thorne was sitting in that chair, reading. He seemed fine. Arthur looked at the floor near the window. He saw some wet footprints on the carpet. They were not very clear because the carpet was dark, but they were definitely there. The footprints led from the window toward the center of the room. Then they stopped. Did it rain yesterday afternoon? Arthur asked. No. Mr. Gable said. The rain started at 7 o'clock tonight. It was a dry day before the storm. Arthur frowned. If the rain started at 7, and the carpet was wet now, the window was open during the storm. But if there were footprints before the rain, who made them? Arthur knelt down and looked under the bed. He saw something small and blue. He reached down and picked it up. It was a blue envelope. What is that? Mr. Gable asked. I do not know yet. Arthur said. He did not open it. He put it safely in his pocket. He looked around the room one more time. Mr. Thorne was gone. He did not take his glasses. He did not take his heavy coat, which was still hanging in the closet. His suitcase was still on the luggage rack. A man of 80 years does not leave through a window in a storm without his coat. Arthur said. Something is very wrong here. Mr. Gable looked very white. What do we do now, Mr. King? We look for more clues. Arthur said. But first, let's go back to the lobby. I want to see what is inside this envelope. Arthur and Mr. Gable walked back down the stairs. The lobby was even darker than before. The wind made a low, whistling sound against the front door. They sat at a small table near the cold fireplace. Arthur took the blue envelope out of his pocket. It was small and square. There was no name on the front, and it was not sealed. Arthur opened the envelope carefully. Inside, there was a single piece of white paper. It was folded 3 times. Arthur unfolded it on the table. It was not a letter. It was a map. This is a map of the hotel grounds, Arthur said. The map was drawn by hand with a black pen. It showed the hotel building, the long driveway, and the large gardens. In the middle of the garden, there was a drawing of a very large tree. Arthur knew it was the old oak tree he saw from his window. There was a bright red circle around the tree. Next to the circle, someone wrote 3 numbers. The 15th of October, 22. Do you recognize this handwriting? Arthur asked. Mr. Gable looked at the paper. He put on his glasses and leaned forward. Yes, he said. That is Mr. Thorne's handwriting. He always writes his S and his T in a special way. But I do not understand this map. He lived here for 20 years. Why did he need a map of the garden? Arthur looked at the numbers. The 15th of October, 22. What do these mean? Is it a date? October 15th, 1922. Or maybe 2022. I don't know. Mr. Gable said. Mr. Thorne is a quiet man, but he is very interested in the history of Silver Oak. He often walks near that tree. He says the tree is older than the house itself. He calls it the Silent Guard. Arthur remembered the wet footprints in room 302. They were near the window. The window had a direct view of the garden. Mr. Thorne was looking at something in the garden. Arthur said. And I think he went out there. But he did not use the front door, did he? No. Mr. Gable said. The night porter was at the desk all night. He saw no one. But he is 80 years old. Arthur said, thinking aloud. He cannot jump from a 3rd-floor window. It is too high. He would definitely hurt himself. Arthur looked at the map again very closely. He noticed a very small, dotted line drawn from the basement of the hotel to the oak tree. It was a thin line, almost hidden by the drawing of the grass. Is there a way to get to the garden from the basement? Mr. Gable shook his head. No. The basement is only for storage and the heater. There is a small service door, but it is always locked from the inside. I have the only key in my office. Arthur touched the red circle on the paper. The mystery was getting deeper. Mr. Thorne was missing, and he left a secret map behind. Tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up, I will go to the oak tree. Arthur said. I want to see what is so important about that spot. The rain is very strong. Mr. Gable warned. The ground will be nothing but mud. I don't mind the mud. Arthur replied. He folded the map and put it back in the blue envelope. He felt a strange excitement. He came to Silver Oak for a rest, but now he had a real puzzle to solve. He looked at the dark hallway and wondered if someone was watching them from the shadows. The heavy front door of the hotel opened slowly. A cold wind blew into the lobby, making the small fire flicker. A woman walked inside. She was very tall and had long, dark hair. She wore a bright red coat that was very wet from the rain. She shook her umbrella, and many drops of water fell onto the floor. "Good evening, Elena," Mr. Gable said. He looked surprised to see her. "I thought you were in your room." "I went for a short walk," the woman replied. Her voice was smooth and calm. She looked at Arthur with curiosity. "But the storm is too strong now." Mr. Gable turned to Arthur. "Mr. King, this is Elena. She is a guest here at Silver Oak. She is a writer." "It is nice to meet you," Arthur said. He watched her closely. Elena was an adult, perhaps 40 years old. She had a very serious face. "I am Arthur King. I'm staying in room 201. Elena smiled, but her eyes did not look happy. "A new guest. That is rare for this time of year. Silver Oak is usually very empty." Arthur decided to ask her about the missing man. "We are looking for Mr. Thorne. He did not come to dinner tonight. Have you seen him today?" Elena stopped moving. She held her umbrella tightly. "Mr. Thorne? Yes. I saw him yesterday evening. It was just before the sun went down. He was near the entrance to the library." "How did he look?" Arthur asked. "He looked busy," Elena said. She took off her red coat. Underneath, she wore a simple black dress. He had a large, heavy book in his hands. He was walking very fast. I said hello, but he did not answer me. He seemed to be in a hurry. Arthur thought about the blue envelope in his pocket. Did he go into the library? "I think so," Elena answered. "But I did not follow him. I went to the dining room for tea." "Why are you asking? Is something wrong?" Mr. Gable stepped forward. "We checked his room, Elena. The window was open, but Mr. Thorne was not there. He did not sleep in his bed last night." Elena put her hand to her mouth. She looked shocked. "That is terrible. He is an old man. Where could he go in this weather?" "We do not know," Arthur said. "But I am going to find out." Elena looked at Arthur for a long time. There was something in her expression that Arthur could not understand. She did not look only sad. She looked nervous. "Be careful, Mr. King," she said quietly. "This hotel is very old. It has many secrets, and some secrets are best left alone." She picked up her red coat and walked toward the stairs. Arthur watched her go. The red of her coat was the only bright color in the dark lobby. He wondered why a writer was staying in such a lonely place. He also wondered if she was telling him everything she knew. He felt that Elena was not just a guest. She was a piece of the puzzle. Arthur stood by the heavy front door of the hotel. He looked through the small glass window in the door. Outside, the world was gray and black. The rain did not fall in drops. It fell in sheets. The wind moved the bushes and the tall grass back and forth. Arthur wanted to see the oak tree. He felt that the tree had the answer to the mystery of Mr. Thorne. He put on his hat and opened the door. The wind was very powerful. It pushed against him like a giant hand. The cold rain hit his face like small stones. Arthur stepped out onto the porch. He could barely see the driveway. He looked toward the center of the garden. A flash of lightning lit up the sky for a moment. He saw the dark shape of the old oak tree. It looked like a skeleton reaching for the clouds. Arthur tried to walk down the steps, but the ground was too soft. His shoes sank into the mud immediately. The wind pulled at his coat. It was impossible to go further. He was already soaked to the bone. His breath came out in white clouds because of the cold. He realized that the garden was too dangerous tonight. He had to wait. He turned back and went inside the hotel. He pushed the door shut and locked it. He took off his wet hat and shook the water from his coat. The lobby was silent. Mr. Gable was no longer at the desk. The fire was now only grey ash. Arthur felt very alone. He walked toward the staircase. His wet shoes made a soft sound on the carpet. He reached the second floor and started walking toward his room. Suddenly, he stopped. A very loud, heavy noise came from the floor above him. It sounded like a large piece of furniture falling over. The floorboards under Arthur's feet shook. The noise was followed by the description of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Arthur looked up at the ceiling. Above him was the third floor. That was where room 302 was located. That was Mr. Thorne's room. "Is someone up there?" Arthur whispered to himself. He waited and listened. For a minute, there was only the sound of the rain on the roof. Then, he heard it again. It was the sound of footsteps. They were slow and heavy. The person was moving away from the stairs and toward the end of the hallway. Arthur's heart began to beat faster. Mr. Gable said the third floor was empty now because Mr. Thorne was gone. Elena was in her room on the second floor. Who was walking above him? Arthur did not go to his room. Instead, he moved toward the stairs that led to the third floor. He moved very quietly. He did not want the person above to hear him. He held the wooden railing tightly. Each step he took felt like a risk. He reached the top of the stairs and looked down the long, dark hallway of the third floor. The door to room 302 was closed, but a thin line of light showed at the bottom of the door. Arthur stood in the dark hallway of the third floor. He waited for another noise, but the hotel was silent again. He walked to the door of room 302 and turned the handle. The door was locked. He looked down, and the thin line of light was gone. The person inside, if there was a person, had turned off the lamp. Arthur decided not to knock. He did not have his service weapon or a heavy flashlight. He needed to be smart. He walked back down the stairs, but he did not go to his room. He followed the smell of roasted meat and onions. It led him to the back of the hotel, where the kitchen was located. The kitchen was a large room with white tiles on the walls and long metal tables. A large man in a white apron was cleaning a big pot. This was the hotel chef. "Hello," Arthur said as he entered the room. "I am Arthur King, a guest here." The chef looked up. He had a round, friendly face and a thick mustache. "Good evening, Mr. King. I am Chef Miller. Are you hungry? I have some cold chicken and bread if you need a late snack." "Thank you, Chef. That is very kind," Arthur replied. He sat on a wooden stool near the table. "I'm actually a bit worried. I was asking Mr. Gable about Mr. Thorne. He seems to be missing." Chef Miller stopped cleaning the pot. He leaned against the table and sighed. "Ah, Mr. Thorne. A very nice man, but very strange lately. He spent a lot of time in my kitchen. You know, not for the food, but for the history." "What do you mean?" Arthur asked. He was obsessed with the old stories of Silver Oak. The chef explained. "He told me that the original owner of this house was a very wealthy man who did not trust banks. Mr. Thorne believed that the owner hid something valuable before he died." Arthur leaned forward. "Did he say where it was hidden?" Chef Miller nodded. He looked toward the kitchen window, which faced the dark garden. "He was always talking about the old oak tree. He told me, Miller, the answers are in the roots. He spent hours watching that tree from his window. He even asked me if I had a small shovel he could borrow." "A shovel?" Arthur asked. "Did you give it to him?" "I did," the chef said. "I gave him a small garden shovel 2 days ago. He looked very excited. He said he was going to find what was buried there. He told me it was the only way to save the hotel." "Save the hotel from what?" Arthur pushed. Chef Miller looked around the kitchen to make sure they were alone. The hotel is losing money, Mr. King. Mr. Gable is a good manager, but the building is old and expensive. Mr. Thorne loved this place. He didn't want it to be sold to a big company. He thought if he found the buried treasure, he could pay for all the repairs. Arthur thought about the blue envelope and the map with the red circle around the tree. It all started to make sense. Mr. Thorne went to the tree to dig. But where was he now? And why did someone turn off the light in his room just a few minutes ago? "Thank you, Chef," Arthur said. "This is very helpful." "Be careful, Mr. King," the chef warned. "People do crazy things when they are looking for gold." Arthur walked out of the kitchen. The hallway was quiet and cool. He felt the weight of the blue envelope in his pocket. The chef's story about a buried treasure made him think. Was Mr. Thorne really looking for gold? Or was it something else? Arthur walked toward the main staircase. He looked at the floor as he walked. Near the bottom of the stairs, he saw something small. It was shining in the dim light of the hallway lamp. He knelt down and picked it up. It was a silver pocket watch. It was old and heavy. The silver was scratched, and the glass over the face was broken into many small pieces. Some of the glass fell onto the carpet as Arthur held it. The watch was not working. The small hands were frozen. Arthur looked at the time on the watch. The big hand was on the 3, and the little hand was just past the 10. It was exactly 10:15. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He took the blue envelope out of his pocket and looked at the numbers on the map again. The 15th of October, 22. 10:15. Arthur whispered, "That is the time on the watch." He looked at the third number. 22. Was it 22 minutes? Or was it something else? He looked at the calendar in his mind. Today was the 22nd day of the month. This watch belonged to Mr. Thorne. Arthur was sure of it. Mr. Gable had said Mr. Thorne was a man of habits and was very punctual. He would never leave a broken watch on the floor. This meant something happened right here, at 10:15 on the 22nd. That was tonight. Suddenly, Arthur felt a cold breeze. He looked up. The front door was still closed and locked. He looked toward the dark corner of the lobby where the shadows were thickest. He felt like someone was watching him from the dark. "Who is there?" Arthur asked. His voice sounded loud in the empty room. There was no answer. He heard the sound of the wind outside. It was a low, moaning sound. Then, he heard a soft rustle, like a coat moving against a wall. It came from the hallway leading to the basement. Arthur put the watch in his pocket next to the envelope. He did not feel tired anymore. He felt a strong need to find the person in the shadows. He walked toward the basement door. The air became colder with every step. He reached for the door handle, but he stopped. He remembered the noise he heard earlier from the 3rd floor. Was the person upstairs or downstairs? The hotel was like a giant puzzle, and Arthur was standing in the middle of it. Every clue led to more questions. He needed to find Mr. Thorne before the night was over. He looked at the basement door and wondered what was waiting for him in the dark below. Arthur stood very still near the basement door. He held his breath and listened. The hallway was very dark. Only a small amount of moonlight came through a window at the end of the hall. The light was grey and weak. He waited for another noise, but for a moment, there was only the sound of the wind outside. Suddenly, a bright beam of light appeared on the wall. It was the light from a flashlight. The light moved quickly across the floor and then up to the ceiling. It came from around the corner of the long hallway. Arthur pressed his back against the cold wall. He did not want to be seen. He watched the light move. Behind the light, he saw a dark shape. It was a person. The person was tall and wore a long, dark coat. Arthur could not see the person's face because the flashlight was pointing away from them. The person moved with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going. The person walked quietly. They did not make a loud sound on the wooden floor. They stopped in front of the heavy door that led to the basement. Arthur watched as the person reached into a pocket. He heard the jingle of metal keys. The person was searching for the right one. After a moment, the person put a key into the lock. A heavy, metallic sound echoed in the quiet hall as the lock turned. The door opened slowly on its hinges. The person stepped inside the basement and pulled the door shut. Arthur heard the lock turn again. The person was now inside, and the door was locked from the other side. Arthur walked to the door. He reached out and tried to turn the handle, but it did not move. He was stuck in the hallway. He felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Who was that person? The shape was too tall to be the elderly Mr. Thorne. Was it Mr. Gable, the manager? Or perhaps Silas, the groundskeeper? Arthur looked down at the floor. In the spot where the person had stood, there was a small patch of wet mud. It was the same dark mud he had seen in the garden. This meant the person had been outside in the rain very recently. They had come from the storm directly to the basement. Arthur remembered what Mr. Gable said earlier. He said he had the only key to the basement in his office. If that was true, then the person with the flashlight was either Mr. Gable or someone who had taken his key without permission. Arthur realized he needed to get into that basement, but he did not have a key, and the door was strong. He thought about the master key he saw on the desk in the office. He also remembered the small, dirty windows he saw on the outside of the building near the ground. The mystery was no longer just about a missing guest. It was about something hidden in the dark parts of the hotel. Arthur decided to find a way to see what was happening under the floorboards. Arthur stood in the dark hallway, staring at the heavy wooden door. He pushed it with his shoulder, but it did not move. The person with the flashlight was now on the other side. Arthur put his ear against the cold wood. He listened very carefully. He heard a soft, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of footsteps walking on stone. The person was going deeper into the basement. Arthur was frustrated. He did not have a key, and he did not want to break the door. He thought about what Mr. Gable said earlier. The manager claimed he had the only key to the basement in his office. If that was true, who just entered the room? Was it Mr. Gable himself? Or did someone steal the key? Arthur turned away from the door. The hallway felt even more dangerous now. He decided to go to the manager's office. He wanted to see if Mr. Gable was there. He walked quietly back toward the lobby. The hotel was a maze of shadows. The wind outside continued to howl, and the old building groaned under the pressure of the storm. When Arthur reached the lobby, he saw that the manager's desk was empty. The small lamp was still on, casting a yellow glow over the leather book and the silver tray. Arthur walked behind the desk. He knew he was being a bit bold, but he had to find the truth. He looked at the wooden board where the room keys hung. Most of the hooks were empty because the hotel was almost vacant. He looked for the master key. It was not on the tray. He checked the drawer of the desk, but it was locked. Then, he looked at the floor near the manager's chair. He saw a small, wet patch of water. Someone had been standing there very recently with wet clothes. "Mr. Gable," Arthur called out. His voice was low. There was no answer. Arthur looked at the hallway leading to the manager's private living area. The door at the end of that hall was slightly open. A small amount of light came from inside. Arthur walked toward it. He felt like he was being watched again. He stopped and looked behind him. The lobby was empty, but the shadows behind the large curtains seemed to move. He reached the private door and pushed it open. The room was a small office filled with books and old papers. A heater was humming in the corner. On the desk, there was a cup of tea. Steam was still rising from the cup. This meant Mr. Gable was here only a minute ago. Next to the tea, there was a heavy ring of keys. Arthur picked them up. He looked at the labels on the keys. One key was larger than the others. It was made of old iron and had the word basement written on a small paper tag. Arthur felt a sense of relief, but also a sense of danger. He now had the key, but he knew he was taking a risk. If the person in the basement was dangerous, Arthur was walking into a trap. He put the keys in his pocket and headed back toward the basement door. He had to know what was hidden beneath Silver Oak. Arthur walked back toward the basement door. He held the keys tightly in his pocket. The iron was cold against his leg. The hallway was very quiet, but he felt a strange presence. It felt like eyes were following him. Suddenly, a large shadow appeared on the wall in front of him. Arthur stopped. A man walked out from a side door. He was very tall and broad. He wore a long, green raincoat that was covered in wet dirt. His face was rough, with a short, grey beard and deep lines around his eyes. He looked like a man who spent all his time outside. This was Silas, the groundskeeper. Silas looked at Arthur. His eyes were small and sharp. He looked at Arthur's hands, then at his face. He did not look friendly. He looked suspicious. "It is late for a walk, Mr. King," Silas said. His voice was very deep and rough. He did not move. He stood in the middle of the hallway like a stone wall. "I'm just looking for Mr. Gable," Arthur said. He tried to stay calm. He did not want Silas to see the keys in his pocket. "I have a question about my room." Silas looked at the door to the basement. Then he looked back at Arthur. "The manager is busy. He has many things to do. And the basement is a dangerous place. It is very old. The stairs are broken, and the floor is wet. Guests must stay away from that door." Arthur looked at Silas's boots. They were heavy and covered in thick, dark mud. It was the same mud Arthur saw near the basement door earlier. It was also the same mud that was on the carpet in room 302. "You have been outside in the storm, Silas?" Arthur asked. Silas did not blink. "The garden needs care, even in the rain. The wind breaks the branches. I have to work to keep the hotel safe." He stepped closer to Arthur. He was much taller than the investigator. "Go back to your room, Mr. King. Sleep is good for an old man. Forget about the basement. It is better for everyone if you stay upstairs." Silas stood there for a long moment. He did not move. Finally, he turned and walked away toward the back door of the hotel. His heavy boots made a loud noise on the wooden floor with every step. The sound echoed through the hallway until he was gone. Arthur waited until he could no longer hear Silas. His heart was beating fast. Silas was definitely hiding something. He was protective of the basement, and he was clearly angry. Was Silas the person Arthur saw with the flashlight? Or was he working with someone else? Arthur took the key out of his pocket. He looked at the heavy door. Silas was watching from somewhere. He was sure of it. But Arthur was an investigator. He could not stop now. He put the key into the lock. He turned it slowly. The lock opened with a heavy, grinding sound. Arthur pushed the door and stepped into the cold darkness. Arthur stood on the top step of the basement stairs. The air below was cold and smelled like wet stone and old dust. He held the heavy iron key in his hand. He had just opened the door, but he did not go down yet. Suddenly, he heard a loud voice from the lobby. It was Mr. Gable. The manager sounded very upset. "Where is it?" "It was right here," Mr. Gable shouted. Arthur froze. He pulled the basement door almost shut, leaving only a small crack so he could hear. He stayed in the shadows of the doorway. He heard the quick, sharp sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. Mr. Gable was running toward the manager's office. Silas! Silas! Come here immediately! Mr. Gable called out. A moment later, Arthur heard the heavy, slow boots of the groundskeeper. Silas was back inside the hotel. "What is the problem, Mr. Gable?" Silas asked. His voice was deep and calm, but it sounded a bit impatient. "The basement key. It is gone from my desk." Mr. Gable's voice was high and nervous. "I left it next to my tea for just a minute. I went to the kitchen to speak with Chef Miller, and when I came back, the key was missing. This is impossible." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. He was a retired investigator, but he felt like a schoolboy who was caught doing something wrong. He looked at the iron key in his palm. He had taken it without asking. He wanted to solve the mystery of Mr. Thorne, but now he was the one causing trouble. "Perhaps you put it in your pocket," Silas said. "No, no. I'm very careful with that key," Mr. Gable replied. Arthur heard the sound of papers being moved and drawers being opened and closed. Mr. Gable was searching his office. "Someone took it. Someone was in my office while I was away." "The guest?" Silas asked. His voice became lower and more dangerous. "The man in room 201. I saw him in the hallway a few minutes ago. He was asking questions about the basement." "Mr. King," Mr. Gable said. He sounded surprised. "He is a guest. Why would he take the key? He is a man of the law, or he was. He is a curious man," Silas said. "Curious men find things they should not see. I told him to go to his room. I told him the basement was dangerous." Arthur heard the two men walking toward the hallway. They were coming toward the basement door. He had to make a choice. He could go down into the dark basement and hide, or he could walk out and tell the truth. But if he told the truth, Mr. Gable might ask him to leave the hotel. If he left, he would never find Mr. Thorne. The footsteps came closer. Arthur moved back into the darkness of the stairs. He moved very slowly and quietly. He did not want the old wooden stairs to make a noise. He reached the middle of the staircase and waited. He held his breath. The basement was completely dark. He could not see his own feet. Above him, the door stayed closed, but he could see a tiny sliver of light from the hallway. "The door is locked," Silas said from the other side. Arthur heard the handle of the door turn. It did not open because Arthur had locked it from the inside after entering. "See," Mr. Gable said. "The door is still locked. If someone took the key, they are not in the basement. They would need the key to lock it from the outside." Arthur realized his mistake. He had locked himself in. If they had another key, he was trapped. He sat down on a cold stone step and waited in the silence. Arthur sat on the cold basement step for a long time. He waited until the voices of Mr. Gable and Silas faded away. He heard their footsteps moving toward the lobby. Finally, the hotel was quiet again. He knew he could not stay in the dark basement forever. He used the iron key to unlock the door from the inside and stepped back into the hallway. He moved quickly and quietly. He did not go back to the lobby. Instead, he went to the hotel library. It was a large, circular room on the first floor. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with old books. The air smelled of vanilla and aged paper. A single green lamp was burning on a heavy oak table in the center of the room. Arthur remembered what Elena and the chef had said. Mr. Thorne spent a lot of time here. Arthur began to look at the shelves. He looked for books about the history of Silver Oak. After a few minutes, he found a thick book with a dark red cover. It was titled The History and Legends of Silver Oak Estate. He took the book to the table and opened it. The pages were yellow and very thin. He turned the pages carefully. He saw old drawings of the hotel when it was first built. It was a beautiful house with many gardens. As he turned to the middle of the book, he felt something thick between the pages. It was an old letter. The paper was dry and felt like it might break. There was no envelope. The letter was dated 50 years ago. To the future owner of Silver Oak. The house holds more than just memories. The ground beneath the oak tree is not the only place where secrets are kept. Look for the room that does not exist on the maps. The heart of the house is hidden behind the wood. Arthur read the words twice. The room that does not exist on the maps. He whispered. He thought about the basement. Was there a hidden room there? He looked at the bottom of the letter. There was a small drawing. It looked like a square with a circle inside it. It was the same symbol he saw on the silver pocket watch earlier. Suddenly, Arthur heard a soft sound. It was the sound of a book being closed. He looked up. Elena was standing at the far end of the library. She was wearing her red coat again. She was holding a small notebook in her hand. "You are very busy tonight, Mr. King," she said. She walked toward the table. Her eyes moved to the red book and the old letter. "I'm trying to understand why Mr. Thorne disappeared," Arthur replied. He did not hide the letter. Elena looked at the letter and sighed. Many people have looked for the hidden parts of this house. Mr. Thorne was the most dedicated. He believed the house was alive. He believed it was protecting something. "Do you know about this room that does not exist?" Arthur asked. Elena shook her head. "I am just a writer, Mr. King. I like stories. But Mr. Thorne, he didn't want a story. He wanted the truth. He told me that the manager, Mr. Gable, was getting very angry with his questions." Arthur felt a chill. If Mr. Gable was angry, perhaps Mr. Thorne was in danger. Arthur looked at the book again. He noticed that one page was missing. It was the page right after the letter. It was torn out in a hurry. "Someone doesn't want us to know everything," Arthur said. Arthur returned to his room, but he did not go to sleep. He turned off his lamp and sat in the wooden chair by the window. He pushed the curtain aside just a little bit. From here, he had a clear view of the garden and the old oak tree. The rain was finally starting to slow down, but the clouds were still thick. Suddenly, Arthur saw a movement near the trees. A flash of red caught his eye. It was Elena. She was walking across the grass, despite the wet ground. She was moving toward the old oak tree. Arthur watched her closely. She didn't look like a writer taking a walk. She looked like someone on a mission. As Elena reached the tree, a second shape emerged from the shadows of the hotel. It was a tall man. Even in the dark, Arthur recognized the heavy walk and the wide shoulders. It was Silas, the groundskeeper. The two figures stood under the long branches of the oak tree. They were very close to each other. Arthur could see them talking, though he could not hear their words. Elena was pointing toward the hotel, and Silas was shaking his head. They looked nervous. Every few seconds, Silas would look back at the hotel windows, checking for light. Elena reached into the pocket of her red coat. She pulled out something small and handed it to Silas. It looked like a piece of paper or perhaps an envelope. Silas took it and quickly put it into his own pocket. Then, he grabbed Elena by the arm. He seemed to be speaking more loudly now, although the distance was too great for Arthur to hear anything but the wind. Elena pulled her arm away and began to walk back toward the hotel. Silas stayed by the tree for a moment, staring up at the windows, before he disappeared into the darkness of the garden. Arthur leaned back from the window. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. Elena told him she was just a writer. She told him she was worried about Mr. Thorne. But here she was, meeting Silas in the middle of the night and giving him secret messages. Was she working with him? Were they the ones who made the noise in Mr. Thorne's room? Arthur looked at the blue envelope on his bedside table. He thought about the map and the hidden room. He realized he could not trust anyone in Silver Oak. Not the nervous manager, not the rough groundskeeper, and certainly not the woman in the red coat. He realized he needed to see what Elena gave to Silas. But more importantly, he needed to know why they were meeting at the oak tree, the very place marked with a red circle on Mr. Thorne's map. The mystery was no longer about a missing man. It was about a conspiracy. Arthur decided that tomorrow, he would not wait for answers. He would find them himself. The next morning, the sun did not shine. The sky was a pale, flat grey. Arthur woke up early. He felt a bit stiff from sitting in the chair all night. He went downstairs to the lobby. It was empty. The smell of breakfast was in the air, bacon and coffee. But Arthur was not hungry for food. He was hungry for the truth. He walked toward the library again. He wanted to look at the history book one more time. As he passed the large trash can near the library door, he saw something interesting. A small piece of glossy paper was sticking out from under some discarded newspapers. Arthur reached down and pulled it out. It was a photograph, but it was torn in half. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then, he moved to a window to see it better. The photo was old. It showed two men standing in front of the Silver Oak Hotel. The building looked newer in the photo. The man on the left was clearly Mr. Thorne. He was younger, with dark hair and a confident smile. He had his arm around the shoulder of the other man. Arthur looked at the man on the right. He had the same cold, grey eyes and the same thin face. It was Mr. Gable. But in this photo, Mr. Gable did not look like a manager. He wore expensive clothes and a heavy gold ring. He looked like a partner. Arthur turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written a date from 20 years ago. Under the date, there were 3 words. The final agreement. Why was this photo in the trash? And why was it torn? It was clear that Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gable were once friends, or perhaps business partners. But now, Mr. Thorne was a guest, and Mr. Gable was the manager. Something had changed between them. Arthur remembered the missing page from the history book. He went into the library and searched the trash can there too. He found several small scraps of paper. He took them to the table and tried to put them together like a puzzle. One scrap had the word ownership on it. Another had a signature, but it was torn through the middle. Only the letters, though, were visible. They were fighting over the hotel. Arthur whispered to himself. He realized the buried treasure might not be gold or jewels. It might be a document that proved who really owned Silver Oak. If Mr. Thorne found it, Mr. Gable would lose everything. Arthur put the torn photo in his pocket. He heard the sound of the dining room doors opening. Breakfast was being served. He needed to act normal. He walked toward the dining room, but his mind was already in the garden, thinking about the red clay and the secrets hidden under the mud. Arthur walked into the dining room. The air was warm, and the smell of coffee was strong. He saw Elena sitting at her usual table. She was reading a book and did not look up when he entered. Mr. Gable was near the buffet, moving plates with a nervous energy. He looked like he had not slept at all. Arthur sat down and ordered a coffee. He watched the room. The old man who usually read the newspaper was not there. The room felt even emptier than the night before. Arthur drank his coffee quickly. He did not want to stay in the dining room. He wanted to explore the parts of the hotel where guests were not allowed. He stood up and walked toward the back of the building. He found the door to the kitchen. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The kitchen was very quiet. Chef Miller was not there. The large stoves were cold, and the metal tables were clean. Arthur walked deeper into the kitchen. He saw a large tray on a side table. On the tray, There was a plate of roasted chicken, a bowl of soup, and a piece of bread. The food looked fresh, but it was cold. It was the same type of meal that was served at dinner the night before. Arthur touched the bowl of soup. It was freezing. He noticed something strange. This tray was not sitting near the washing area. It was sitting near a small, wooden door in the back corner of the kitchen. This door was small and narrow. It looked like it led to a pantry or a storage closet. Arthur walked to the small door. He reached for the handle, but he heard a noise. It was the sound of a heavy door closing somewhere nearby. He quickly stepped behind a large metal refrigerator and waited. Chef Miller walked into the kitchen from the outside door. He was carrying a bag of potatoes. He looked tired. He walked straight to the tray of cold food. He looked at it for a long moment and sighed. He picked up the tray and carried it to the large trash bin. He dumped the food inside. Waste. The chef whispered to himself. Such a waste. Arthur waited until the chef went into the walk-in freezer. Then, Arthur stepped out from behind the refrigerator. He looked at the small door again. There was a small sliding window on the door, like the ones used in hospitals or prisons to look inside a room. He realized the chef was not just cooking for the guests in the dining room. He was preparing food for someone else. Someone who was not eating. Was this food for Mr. Thorne? Was the missing man hidden somewhere inside the hotel walls? Arthur heard the chef coming back. He quickly exited the kitchen through the side door. He was now in a small hallway that led to the garden. The air was cold, and the ground was still wet. He looked at his shoes. He knew that the next part of his investigation would be the most difficult. He had to find where that food was supposed to go. Arthur stepped out into the garden. The air was fresh after the storm, but the ground was very soft. He walked carefully. He did not want to leave deep footprints in the mud. He moved toward the center of the garden, where the old oak tree stood. The tree was massive. Its branches were thick and covered in green moss. Arthur looked at the ground around the tree. He saw the spot where the dirt was disturbed, but he also saw something else. About 20 meters away from the tree, there was a small circle of stones. It was almost hidden by tall, wet grass and thick bushes. Arthur walked toward the stones. As he got closer, he realized it was an old well. The stones were gray and covered in white lichen. A heavy wooden cover sat on top of the well. The wood was dark and rotting. Arthur noticed something important. The grass around the well was flattened. Someone had been standing here recently. He looked at the heavy wooden cover. There were finger marks in the mud on the side of the wood. The cover had been moved. Arthur leaned over the well. He grabbed the edge of the wooden cover and pulled. It was very heavy. He had to use all his strength. Slowly, he moved the cover to the side. A dark, deep hole appeared. The air coming from the well was very cold and smelled like wet earth and old iron. "Hello," Arthur called out. He did not shout, but his voice was firm. There was no answer. He listened carefully. He did not hear a voice, but he heard something else. Far below, there was a soft sound. It was a rhythmic sound, like metal hitting stone. It was very faint. Arthur looked around the garden. He found a small stone and dropped it into the well. He waited. He did not hear the stone hit water. Instead, he heard a dry, hollow sound. The well was empty. It was not a well for water anymore. He remembered the map in the blue envelope. The map showed a dotted line from the basement to the oak tree. This well was halfway between the hotel and the tree. Was it possible that the well was connected to a tunnel? Arthur looked back at the hotel. From this position, he could see the kitchen window and the window of room 302. He felt a sense of danger. If he could see the hotel, someone in the hotel could see him. He saw a movement at the kitchen window. A face appeared for a second and then vanished. It was too fast to see who it was. Arthur quickly pushed the wooden cover back over the well. He tried to make it look like it had not been touched. He realized that the buried treasure might not be under the tree itself. It might be in the passages beneath the ground. But he needed a light, and he needed a way to get down there safely. He turned away from the well and started walking back to the hotel, but he felt like he was being hunted. Every shadow in the garden seemed to move. Arthur walked back into the hotel. His boots were covered in heavy, red mud. He felt tired, and his heart was still beating fast from his discovery at the old well. He wanted to go to his room to think. He needed to organize all the clues: the broken watch, the blue envelope, the cold food, and the empty well. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was silent. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were watching him. He reached room 201 and reached into his pocket for his key. But as he looked at his door, he stopped. There was a small piece of white paper stuck to the wood of the door. It was held there by a small, sharp pin. Arthur pulled the paper off and looked at it. The message was written in large, capital letters. The ink was black and thick. "Go home before the rain stops." Arthur looked down the hallway. It was empty. All the doors were closed. He looked at the message again. It was a clear warning. Someone wanted him to leave Silver Oak. Was it Mr. Gable? Was it Silas? Or was it Elena, who he had seen meeting Silas in the garden? Arthur opened his door and went inside. He locked the door behind him and pushed a heavy chair in front of it. He did not feel safe anymore. He sat on the bed and held the note in his hand. The paper felt cheap, like the kind of paper used in the hotel's office. He thought about the words, "Before the rain stops." It was a strange sentence. The rain had already slowed down, but the sky was still dark with clouds. Did it mean he had only a few hours left? Arthur realized that his presence was making someone very nervous. He was getting too close to the truth. He took out the blue envelope and the torn photograph. He looked at the young Mr. Thorne and the young Mr. Gable. They looked happy in the photo, but now one was missing and the other was hiding something. Suddenly, Arthur heard a soft sound outside his door. It was not a footstep. It was the sound of something sliding across the floor. He stood up and walked to the door. He listened. There was a faint scratching noise, then silence. He moved the chair and opened the door quickly. The hallway was empty, but there was something on the floor. It was a small, white flower. It was a lily. Arthur knew that lilies were often used for funerals. He picked up the flower. It was fresh and wet. Someone had just placed it there. The warning was not just a suggestion. It was a threat. Arthur went back into his room and closed the door. He was not going to leave. He was an investigator, and he had a job to finish. He decided that he would wait for the middle of the night. Then, he would find the entrance to the basement again. He had to find the room that does not exist. Arthur waited in his room until the hotel was completely silent. The clock on the wall showed midnight. He did not turn on the main light. He used a small, silver flashlight he kept in his suitcase. He put on his heavy coat and gloves. He was ready. He knew that Mr. Gable and Silas were likely watching the main hallways. He could not use the inside stairs to reach the basement again. He had to find another way. He remembered the outside of the building. When he arrived, he saw small, rectangular windows near the ground. Those windows belonged to the basement. Arthur climbed out of his first-floor window. It was a short drop to the wet grass. He landed quietly. The air was very cold, and the wind moved the trees with a soft rustle. He stayed close to the stone wall of the hotel. He moved like a shadow. He walked toward the back of the building. He knelt in the mud and looked for the small windows. The first two windows were locked and covered in thick dirt. He kept moving. Finally, he found a third window. This one was different. The glass was cracked, and the metal frame was slightly bent. Arthur pushed the window. It did not move at first. He pushed harder with his shoulder. The window opened with a slow, grinding noise. The opening was very small, but Arthur was a thin man. He put his legs in first and slowly lowered himself into the dark room below. He dropped onto a hard, cold floor. He turned on his flashlight. The beam of light cut through the thick dust in the air. He was in a large storage room. There were tall wooden shelves filled with old paint cans, broken chairs, and dusty boxes of papers. The air smelled of wet earth and old metal. Arthur walked slowly, moving the light across the floor. He wanted to find the footprints he saw earlier. As he moved the light near a large, wooden crate, he saw something dark on the grey stone floor. He walked closer and knelt down. It was a hat. It was a black felt hat, very elegant and expensive. Arthur picked it up. He recognized it immediately. It was the hat Mr. Thorne wore in the photograph he found earlier. The hat was dry, which meant it had been here for a long time, before the storm started. "He was here," Arthur whispered. Next to the hat, Arthur saw a long, dark mark on the floor. It looked like something heavy had been dragged across the stone. The mark led away from the storage room and toward a heavy wooden door at the end of the basement. Arthur felt a cold shiver. Finding the hat was a victory. But it was also a tragedy. Mr. Thorne would never leave his favorite hat on a dirty basement floor. It meant he was taken by force. Arthur held the hat tightly. He looked at the heavy door. He knew that the answers were behind that wood. But he also knew that he was no longer alone in the dark. Arthur stood in the center of the large storage room. The beam of his flashlight was the only thing fighting the darkness. He held Mr. Thorne's black hat in one hand. With the other, he moved the light slowly across the floor. The dust here was thick, like a grey carpet. He looked closely at the ground. Near the spot where he found the hat, there were many footprints. Some were small and light, but others were very large and deep. The large footprints had a heavy pattern on the bottom. Arthur recognized that pattern. It was the same one he saw on Silas's boots in the hallway. "Silas was here," Arthur said quietly to himself. He followed the marks with his light. The footprints led away from the window and toward the back of the room. He saw more than just footprints. There were long, straight lines in the dust. It looked like a heavy wooden cupboard or a large chest had been pushed across the floor. Arthur followed the lines. They stopped in front of a very large wooden cupboard. The cupboard was made of dark, heavy oak. It was very old and reached almost to the ceiling. It had two large doors, and on the front, there was a heavy iron padlock. Arthur walked to the cupboard. He noticed that the dust on the floor around the base was disturbed. This cupboard did not belong here. It was moved recently to cover something on the wall. He tried to pull the cupboard away from the wall, but it was too heavy. It felt like it was bolted to the floor or filled with stones. He looked at the iron padlock. It was new and shiny. It did not match the old, dusty cupboard. Someone wanted to keep people out of this specific piece of furniture. Arthur leaned his head against the wood of the cupboard. He stayed very still and listened. At first, he heard nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Then, he heard a very faint noise. It was not a voice. It was a soft, metallic clicking sound, like a clock ticking or someone tapping a ring against a pipe. It came from behind the cupboard. Arthur realized that this was not just a storage unit. It was a barrier. Behind this wood, there was a space, a room, or perhaps a tunnel. He remembered the room that does not exist from the letter in the library. He felt a sense of urgency. He needed to open this padlock. He looked around the storage room for a tool. He saw a metal crowbar leaning against a pile of old bricks in the corner. He walked over to pick it up. As he reached for the tool, his flashlight caught something else on the wall. It was a small, red stain. Arthur touched it with his finger. It was dry, but it was definitely blood. His heart began to race. The mystery was becoming a crime. He gripped the metal crowbar tightly. He was ready to break the lock, but then he heard a sound from above. It was the sound of the basement door opening, the one inside the hotel. A bright light appeared at the top of the stairs. Arthur ducked behind a stack of old wooden crates. He turned off his silver flashlight and waited in the total darkness. His heart was beating so loudly that he was afraid the person would hear it. The light from the top of the stairs grew brighter and brighter. He heard the slow, heavy boots on the stone steps. It was Silas. The groundskeeper was holding a large, black flashlight. He moved the beam of light around the room. The light passed over the crates where Arthur was hiding. Arthur held his breath and stayed very still. He pressed his body against the cold wood of the crates. Silas walked straight to the large cupboard. He did not look at the small window Arthur had used to enter. He only cared about the cupboard. He reached out and touched the heavy iron padlock. He pulled on it once to make sure it was secure. Then, he did something strange. He leaned his ear against the wood, just like Arthur had done earlier. Silas stood there for a long minute. He looked tired and very worried. He whispered something quietly, but Arthur could not hear the words. Then, Silas turned around and walked back to the stairs. The light moved away, and the basement door closed. Arthur heard the key turning in the lock. Arthur was alone again. He waited for a few minutes to be sure Silas was really gone. Then, he stood up. His legs felt a bit weak, but his mind was sharp. He picked up the metal crowbar from the corner. He walked back to the cupboard. He put the end of the crowbar into the loop of the padlock. He pulled with all his strength. His muscles hurt, and his face turned red from the effort. The metal made a loud, grinding noise against the wood. Arthur stopped and listened. Was Silas still nearby? The hotel was silent. Arthur pulled again. He gave one final, heavy push. The iron padlock snapped. It fell to the stone floor with a sharp, heavy noise that echoed in the empty room. Arthur caught his breath. He took a deep breath and pulled the heavy cupboard doors open. Inside, the cupboard was not full of clothes or boxes. It was mostly empty. But the back of the cupboard was missing. Instead of a wooden wall, there was a dark hole in the stone wall of the basement. A narrow set of stairs made of old bricks led down even deeper into the earth. Arthur felt a cold wind coming from the hole. It smelled like the wet earth of the garden and the old well. He knew he had found it. This was the way to the room that did not exist on any map. He turned on his flashlight and stepped inside the cupboard. He moved carefully over the broken lock and began to go down the hidden stairs. Arthur looked at his watch. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. He could see the first light of day through the small basement window. He knew he could not stay here. The hotel staff would wake up soon. He had to be in his room before anyone saw him. He stepped out of the hidden stairs and back into the storage room. He closed the heavy cupboard doors. He picked up the broken padlock. He could not fix it, so he used a small piece of dark wire he found on a shelf to hold the lock in place. From a distance, it looked closed. He hoped Silas would not look too closely. Arthur climbed back out through the narrow window. The grass was cold and wet. He reached his bedroom and climbed inside. He was tired, but his mind was moving fast. He took off his muddy clothes and washed his face. He hid Mr. Thorne's black hat deep inside his suitcase. Then, he put on a clean shirt and went downstairs. The dining room was very cold. A small fire was burning, but it did not provide much heat. Arthur sat at a table near the wall. He ordered eggs and a large cup of black coffee. He watched the other guests. Elena was already there. She was wearing a blue sweater today. She was writing in her notebook, but she looked up every time the door opened. A few minutes later, Silas entered the room. He did not go to the kitchen. He went straight to Mr. Gable, who was standing near the large wooden desk. Silas was still wearing his muddy boots. He looked very angry. The two men moved to a dark corner of the room, near a large curtain. Arthur leaned back and tried to listen. He could not hear their words, but he could see their faces. Silas was speaking quickly. He moved his hands a lot. He pointed toward the floor, likely toward the basement. Mr. Gable was shaking his head. His face was very pale, almost white. He looked like he was about to cry. At one point, Silas grabbed Mr. Gable by the shoulder. It was not a friendly movement. It was a warning. Silas leaned in and whispered something into the manager's ear. Mr. Gable nodded slowly. Silas let go and walked out of the room. He did not look at Arthur or Elena. Mr. Gable stood still for a moment. He straightened his tie and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Then, he walked toward the kitchen. He was walking very fast. Arthur drank his coffee. The tension in the room was thick. He knew that Silas and Mr. Gable were fighting about something important. Perhaps Silas wanted to do something that Mr. Gable was afraid of. Arthur realized that the secret in the basement was becoming a danger to everyone in the hotel. He needed to find the missing page from the history book. He felt that the page was the final piece of the puzzle. Arthur walked quickly to the library. He wanted to be alone. He felt that the library held the key to the whole mystery. The room was quiet and smelled of old paper. He went straight to the table where the red history book was sitting. He looked at the spot where the page was torn out. The edges were sharp. Someone had used a knife or a very steady hand to remove it. Arthur began to search the shelves near the history section. He moved books carefully. He looked behind the large encyclopedias and under the smaller poetry books. He knew that if someone tore the page out in a hurry, they might have hidden it nearby. He noticed a book that looked out of place. It was a thin, green book about garden flowers. It was sitting on a shelf full of books about law and business. Arthur pulled the green book from the shelf. As he opened it, a piece of yellow paper fell to the floor. Arthur picked it up. It was the missing page from the history book. The paper was thin and old. He took it to the window to read it in the morning light. The page described the construction of Silver Oak in 1910. It spoke about the original owner, a man named George Thorne. According to the text, George Thorne was a very private man. He built a safe room in the basement to protect his most important documents. The page described a secret door hidden behind a large wooden cupboard. Arthur smiled. He had already found that door. But the most important part was at the bottom of the page. It was a copy of a legal document. It said that the Thorne family would always own the land of Silver Oak. It stated that the manager of the hotel was only a worker, not an owner. It also said that the original deed of ownership was kept in the safe room, locked in a metal box. "This is it," Arthur whispered. "This is why Mr. Gable is so nervous. If Mr. Thorne found that metal box, he could prove that Mr. Gable was not the true owner. Mr. Gable was just an employee who had taken control of the hotel over many years. He was a manager who wanted to be a king." Arthur looked at the page again. He saw a small note written in the margin in pencil. The handwriting was fresh. It said, "The box is under the stone with the circle." Arthur remembered the silver watch and the letter. They both had the same circle symbol. He realized that Mr. Thorne had found this page first. Mr. Thorne knew exactly where the box was. He went to the basement to find it, but someone caught him. Suddenly, Arthur heard a floorboard creak behind him. He quickly folded the page and put it in his pocket. He turned around. The library door was slightly open. He saw a shadow move across the hallway. Someone was watching him. He realized that he was no longer just an investigator. He was now a target. He had the information that could destroy Mr. Gable's future. He had to be very careful. Arthur left the library and walked into the lounge. The room was large and had many soft chairs. Elena was sitting by the fireplace. She had a silver tray with a teapot and 2 china cups. She looked at Arthur and gestured to the empty chair. "Mr. King, would you like some tea?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were very sharp. Arthur sat down. He felt the weight of the folded page in his pocket. He wondered if he could trust her. "Thank you, Elena," he said. Elena poured the tea into a cup and handed it to him. "I know you were in the library. I also know you found the missing page. I am not your enemy, Arthur. In fact, I think we have the same goal." Arthur took a slow drink of the tea. It was warm and tasted of bergamot. "You said you were a writer. Why did you lie?" Elena sighed. She looked at the small fire. "In my world, truth is a dangerous thing. I am not a novelist. I am a private art collector. I travel the world to find lost masterpieces. I am here because of a specific painting. The Morning Oak." "I have never heard of it," Arthur admitted. "Few people have." Elena explained. "It was the last work of the artist Lydia Vance. It shows this hotel and the old oak tree at sunrise. The original owner, George Thorne, was Vance's best friend. He bought the painting and brought it here. But after George died, the painting vanished." Arthur leaned forward. "Is it valuable?" "It is worth millions of dollars," Elena said. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Gable is in a lot of debt. The hotel is failing. He wants to find that painting and sell it to a private buyer. But Mr. Thorne, the man who is missing, refused. He told Gable that the painting belongs to the Silver Oak estate, not to a manager's bank account." "Did they fight?" Arthur asked. "Yes." Elena nodded. 2 days ago, I heard them in the office. Mr. Gable was shouting. He said he would do anything to save his hotel. Mr. Thorne said it was not Gable's hotel to save. He said he had proof of the true ownership. Arthur thought about the metal box in the basement and the secret room he had discovered behind the cupboard. Everything was connected. The land, the painting, and the legal documents. "I think Mr. Thorne found the painting," Elena continued. "But I think Silas and Mr. Gable found him first. We have to find him, Arthur. Not just for the art, but for his life. Silas is a dangerous man, and he will do whatever Mr. Gable tells him to do." Arthur looked at the woman. He still wasn't sure if she was telling the whole truth, but he knew one thing. He could not solve this alone. The mystery of the Morning Oak was the heart of the secret. Arthur left the lounge and went to the back door. The sun was still hiding behind grey clouds. He saw Silas near the front of the hotel. The groundskeeper was moving large branches that the storm had broken. This was Arthur's chance. He knew Silas lived in a small wooden cabin at the edge of the hotel garden. Arthur walked quickly across the wet grass. He stayed behind the large bushes so Silas could not see him. The ground was soft and his shoes made deep marks in the mud. After a few minutes, he reached the cabin. It was a simple building made of dark wood. There was one small window and a heavy door. Arthur tried the door handle. It was locked. He looked around and found a large stone. He did not want to break the window, but he noticed that the window was not fully closed. He used a small piece of wood to push the window open further. He climbed inside the cabin. The air inside was thick and smelled of old tobacco and wet wool. The room was very messy. There was a small bed in the corner with a dirty grey blanket. A wooden table held a half-eaten piece of bread and a tin cup. Arthur turned on his small flashlight. He moved the light across the floor. He looked under the bed. There, he saw a pair of heavy work boots. They were the same boots Silas wore in the hallway, but they were covered in a very thick, bright red clay. Arthur knelt down and touched the clay. It was still a little bit wet. This clay was very different from the brown mud in the garden. The hotel sat on grey stone and dark earth. Where did the red clay come from? Arthur remembered a map he saw in the hotel lobby earlier that morning. It showed the geography of the local area. There was only one place nearby with red clay, the old quarry near the stone shed. Arthur looked around the cabin more. He saw a set of keys on the table. One key had a red ribbon on it. He also saw a small piece of paper with a drawing of a square and a circle. It was the same symbol from the pocket watch and the library letter. Silas is part of this. Arthur whispered. He heard a voice outside. It was Silas. He was talking to someone. Arthur quickly climbed back out of the window. He dropped to the ground and hid behind a stack of firewood. He watched as Silas walked toward the cabin. The groundskeeper looked angry. He was holding a shovel in his hand. Arthur waited until Silas went inside and closed the door. He felt a cold shiver. The red clay was a very important clue. It meant Silas was spending time at the stone shed. And if the shed had red clay, that was likely where Mr. Thorne or the painting was hidden. Arthur knew he had to go to the quarry next. He needed to find that stone shed before the sun went down. The sound of the heavy bolt sliding home felt like a death sentence. Arthur rushed to the iron door and pulled with all his strength. But it didn't budge. Silas had trapped them inside the stone shed. "It's no use," Mr. Thorne said, his voice stronger now that his hands were free. He rubbed his sore wrists. "Silas won't open that door until Mr. Gable arrives. They think I have the key to the metal box." Arthur turned back to the elderly man. "We don't have much time. You said the truth is buried under the red earth. Show me." Mr. Thorne pointed to a patch of ground in the center of the shed where the red clay was particularly thick and disturbed. Silas spent hours digging a hole there. But he was looking in the wrong spot. He's a brute. He doesn't understand the history of this place. Arthur knelt in the red clay. He used the crowbar he had carried from the basement to probe the ground. About 2 feet away from the hole Silas had dug, the crowbar hit something solid. It wasn't the sound of stone. It was wood. Arthur cleared away the wet clay with his hands. He revealed a small, square wooden hatch with a heavy iron ring. He pulled the ring, and the hatch lifted, revealing a shallow stone-lined compartment. Inside sat a small, rusted metal box, the same one mentioned in the library letter. The deed of ownership. Mr. Thorne whispered. "And the location of the painting. My grandfather hidden them here during the Great Depression to keep the hotel safe from banks." Arthur used the crowbar to snap the old lock on the box. Inside were several folded documents and a small, leather-bound tube. He pulled out the documents. They were official, stamped with the seal of the local government from 1930. They clearly stated that the Thorne family held a permanent, unbreakable claim to the Silver Oak estate. Mr. Gable was merely a temporary caretaker whose contract had expired years ago. "This is why Gable wanted you gone," Arthur said, looking at the papers. "With these, he has no power. He's been stealing from the estate for years." Suddenly, they heard an engine outside. A car was approaching the quarry. "Gable," Mr. Thorne whispered, his face turning pale. "He's come to finish this." Arthur looked around the shed. There were no other exits, but he noticed a small ventilation pipe near the ceiling. It was too small for a person, but it was enough to let in a sliver of light, and perhaps a way to signal for help. He reached into his pocket and felt the silver pocket watch. He had an idea. The engine noise cut out, followed by the heavy slam of a car door. Arthur stood up, clutching the metal box. He could hear voices outside. Gable's sharp, panicked tone and Silas's low, rumbling growl. "Is he still in there?" Gable asked. Both of them are. Silas replied. The investigator followed me. I've got them locked in tight. Arthur looked at Mr. Thorne. Stay behind the stone pillar. He whispered. He moved to the door, gripping the crowbar. He knew he couldn't fight both men at once, but he had the documents, and more importantly, he had the truth. The heavy bolt slid back. The iron door opened, and the cold morning air rushed into the shed. Mr. Gable stepped inside, his expensive suit splattered with red mud. He held a small, black revolver in his hand, though his fingers were shaking. Silas stood behind him, looking like a shadow in the doorway. Give me the box, Mr. King, Gable said, his voice cracking. You don't understand. I've given my life to that hotel. I won't let an old man and a retired detective take it from me. It was never yours to keep, Gable, Arthur said firmly. He held up the deed. This document proves the Thorne family owns every stone of Silver Oak. You aren't a manager, you're a thief. Gable's eyes went wide with rage. Silas, get the box. As Silas stepped forward, Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver pocket watch. He held it up so the sliver of sunlight from the ventilation pipe hit the broken glass. A bright, sharp reflection danced across the room, momentarily blinding the groundskeeper. In that moment of confusion, Arthur swung the crowbar, not at Silas, but at the heavy wooden support beam near the door. The wood was old and rotted from years of dampness. The beam splintered. The roof of the shed groaned. Dust and debris rained down. Silas lunged for Arthur, but the shifting weight of the structure forced him to stumble back toward the entrance. Arthur grabbed Mr. Thorne's arm and pulled him toward the back corner where the stone was strongest. The shed is collapsing, Gable screamed, dropping the gun as he scrambled backward out of the doorway. Silas tried to reach for the box one last time, but a heavy stone fell from the ceiling, landing between him and Arthur. Realizing the danger, the groundskeeper turned and fled into the open air of the quarry. Arthur and Mr. Thorne huddled against the back wall as a section of the roof caved in, blocking the doorway with a wall of timber and stone. Then, silence returned, broken only by the sound of Gable's car speeding away. Are you all right? Arthur asked, coughing through the dust. I am, Mr. Thorne said, clutching the leather-bound tube that had been in the box. He looked at the blocked exit. But we are trapped again. Arthur looked at the pile of rubble. Not for long. The police will be looking for me by now. I left a message with the chef before I followed Silas. He looked at the documents in his hand. The reign of Mr. Gable is over. The silence in the collapsed shed was heavy with dust. Arthur and Mr. Thorne waited, sheltered by the ancient stone wall. Just as the air was beginning to feel thin, the sound of shouting reached them from above. It wasn't the panicked cry of Gable, but the steady, booming voice of Chef Miller. Over here. The stone shed. Within an hour, local officers and the chef had cleared enough rubble to pull the two men out. The morning sun was finally breaking through the grey clouds, casting a golden light over the red clay of the quarry. I found your note in the kitchen, Mr. King, Chef Miller said, wiping sweat from his brow. I knew something was wrong when Gable drove off like a madman. Arthur didn't waste time. We need to get back to the hotel. The Morning Oak is still there, and so is Elena. They returned to Silver Oak to find the police already waiting. Mr. Gable had been stopped at a roadblock 5 miles away, and Silas had been found trying to hide in the woods. But the final mystery remained. Mr. Thorne led Arthur and the officers to the library. The letter said the heart of the house is hidden behind the wood. Arthur reminded him. Mr. Thorne walked to the grand fireplace, which was framed by intricately carved oak panels. He pressed a small, hidden lever shaped like an acorn. The central wooden panel slid upward. There, protected from light and moisture for decades, was a canvas that glowed with life. It was Lydia Vance's masterpiece. The painting showed the hotel not as a cold, lonely place, but as a warm sanctuary under a rising sun. Its beauty was breathtaking, far more valuable than the gold Mr. Gable had imagined. As Arthur King packed his suitcase in room 201, he looked out at the old oak tree. The rain had stopped completely, and the garden was vibrant and green. He checked his pocket. The silver watch was gone, returned to Mr. Thorne, but he kept the blue envelope as a souvenir of his final case. He walked down the stairs, no longer a stranger in a dark house, but a friend leaving a home. He stepped out into the fresh air, took a deep breath, and began his journey back to the city. The mystery of Silver Oak was solved. The suitcase was packed and sitting by the door of room 201. Arthur King stood at the window, watching the morning fog roll off the hills. The mystery of Mr. Thorne and the Morning Oak was solved, or so he thought. He had his ticket for the noon train, and the peace of the hotel seemed restored. But as he turned to grab his coat, the sound of a heavy engine disturbed the silence of the driveway. A long, black vintage car, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up to the front steps. It didn't look like a visitor's car. It looked like a hearse for the living. A driver in a crisp grey uniform stepped out and opened the rear door. A woman emerged, draped in a coat of silver fur despite the warming weather. She carried an air of cold authority that made the morning air feel frigid again. Arthur felt a familiar prickle at the back of his neck, the instinct that told him his vacation was not yet over. He walked down to the lobby. Mr. Thorne was there, standing behind the desk with Chef Miller. Both men looked puzzled. "Can I help you, madam?" Mr. Thorne asked, his voice still a bit thin from his ordeal in the shed. The woman didn't answer immediately. She pulled off her silk gloves, finger by finger, and looked around the lobby with an expression of intense distaste. "So, this is it," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "The jewel of the Thorne family. It looks more like a tomb." "I am Edward Thorne, the owner," Edward said, straightening his back. "And you are?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her pale blue eyes. She reached into a small alligator skin clutch and produced a document bound in heavy blue ribbon. "My name is Beatrice Thorne Vance. I am the granddaughter of George Thorne's first wife, the one the history books conveniently forget. And I am here because your deed of ownership, Edward, is only half of the story." Arthur stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the document. "What do you mean, half the story?" Beatrice turned to Arthur, her gaze lingering on his face as if she were memorizing a target. "Mr. King, I presume. The hero of the hour. You found a deed that says the Thorne family owns the land, but you didn't look at the corporate charter of Silver Oak. The land is theirs. Yes, but the building, the stones, the roof, and every piece of art inside it belongs to a trust that hasn't been touched in 80 years. A trust that I represent." She placed the document on the counter. "I'm not here for a room, Edward. I'm here to take possession of my property. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." The atmosphere in the lobby shifted from triumph to total confusion. Arthur walked to the desk and looked at the papers Beatrice had presented. As a retired investigator, he had seen thousands of legal documents, but this one was different. It was written in a cramped, archaic hand, and the seal at the bottom was a design he recognized, the square and the circle. But this time, they were entwined with a serpent. "This trust," Arthur said, pointing to the seal. "It's dated 1935. That was the year George Thorne went into hiding during the Great Depression." "Precisely," Beatrice replied, smoothing her coat. "My grandfather was a cautious man. He knew that land could be seized by the government. But a private trust, buried in the vaults of a defunct bank, was untouchable. He split the ownership. Edward has the soil. I have the stone. And since you cannot have a hotel without a building, Edward is merely a squatter on his own land. Edward Thorne sank into a chair, his face turning grey. I didn't know. I thought the box in the shed was everything. Arthur picked up the document. He noticed something strange. The ink on the signature was dark, almost too dark for a document that was supposed to be nearly a century old. He held it up to the light. Mr. Thorne, don't give up just yet. There's something about the paper's watermark that doesn't quite sit right with me. Beatrice's smile twitched. The document is verified, Mr. King. My lawyers have already filed the claim with the local magistrate. I suggest you spend your remaining time packing. Arthur ignored her and turned to Chef Miller. Chef, is there a quiet room where Mr. Thorne and I can talk? And I'll need a magnifying glass and a strong lamp. Of course, the back office, Miller said, eyeing Beatrice with suspicion. As Arthur led Edward away, he felt Beatrice's eyes on his back. He knew she wasn't just here for the building. No one comes to a crumbling hotel in the middle of nowhere just for the stones. She was looking for something else, something Gable hadn't found, and something the Morning Oak painting was only a clue to. In the small office, Arthur spread the document out. Edward, did your grandfather ever mention a woman named Lydia? The name on this trust is Lydia Vance Thorne. Edward shook his head. No. My grandmother was Sarah. I never heard of a Lydia. But the name Vance, that was the artist. Julian Vance. Arthur's eyes sharpened. If the artist and the first wife shared a name, the connection between the painting and this building is much deeper than we thought. This isn't just a property dispute. This is a family war that was frozen in time. Arthur decided to stay. He unpacked his suitcase and moved his things back into room 201. The hotel felt different now, heavy with a new kind of tension. Beatrice Thornvance had taken over the master suite on the 3rd floor, and the sound of her footsteps seemed to echo through the ventilation shafts like a heartbeat. That night, the rain returned, though it was a light, rhythmic tapping rather than the storm of the previous week. Arthur sat at his desk, studying the blueprints he had pulled from the library. He was looking for the room that does not exist, but he was also looking for something else, the plumbing. A strange sound began to drift through the room. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the rain. It was a rhythmic, metallic tapping, coming from deep inside the walls. It sounded like Morse code, or perhaps someone striking a pipe with a wrench. Arthur stood up and put his ear to the wall near the radiator. The sound was clearer here. It was coming from below, but also from above. It was a sequence. He grabbed a notepad and began to mark the taps. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, Arthur whispered. He followed the sound out into the hallway. The hotel was dark, the only light coming from the flickering wall lamps. The tapping led him toward the service elevator, a small, manual lift that had been out of use for decades. The cables were rusted, and the door was boarded up. As Arthur stood by the elevator, the tapping stopped. Then, a voice drifted through the shaft. It was muffled, sounding as if it were coming from a great distance or through layers of insulation. Under the copper, the 3rd joint. It was Beatrice's voice. She wasn't sleeping. She was talking to someone, but there was no one else on the 3rd floor except her driver. Arthur realized the service elevator wasn't just a relic. It was a speaking tube. The way the hotel was built, the hollow shafts acted as a natural intercom system. He hurried back to his room and looked at the plumbing diagrams again. He saw a line marked in red ink that he had missed before. It led from the 3rd floor suite directly down to a sub-basement, a level even lower than the storage room where he had found the hidden stairs. She's looking for the copper heart, Arthur realized. He remembered a line from the architect's journal he'd skimmed earlier. The heart of the house is not stone, but metal, where the heat flows. Suddenly, his door handle turned. Arthur froze. He hadn't locked it. The door opened, and a sliver of light from the hallway spilled in. A shadow fell across the floor. It was Edward Thorne. He looked disheveled, his eyes wide with fear. In his hands, he clutched a small, leather-bound book that Arthur hadn't seen before. "Arthur, I found it," Edward whispered, closing the door behind him. "It was in the lining of my grandfather's old trunk. I thought it was just a sketchbook, but it's the personal diary of Silas Vane, not the groundskeeper, but the man who built this place." Arthur took the journal. The leather was cracked, and the pages were brittle. He opened it to the middle. The sketches were not of rooms or gardens, but of complex gears, pulleys, and what looked like a massive boiler system. Vane wasn't just an architect, Arthur said, flipping through the pages. He was an engineer. He designed Silver Oak to be a living machine. "Look at these notes." He pointed to a page titled, "The Thermal Pulse. To keep the secrets of the Thorne family safe, I have placed the true archive within the heat. Only when the furnace is cold and the pressure is released will the path be revealed. The copper heart holds the key." "The copper heart," Arthur said. "Beatrice was talking about it in the elevator shaft. She knows the hotel isn't just a building. It's a giant safe." "But the furnace hasn't been lit in years," Edward said. "We use electric heaters now. The old boiler is in the sub-basement, behind a wall of coal that no one has moved since 1945. Arthur looked at the sketch of the boiler. It was a massive, cylindrical beast of iron and copper. If Beatrice is here to claim the building, she needs the archive to prove the trust is valid. But the archive is inside the boiler system. She's trying to find a way to get to it without blowing up the hotel. Arthur, if she finds it first, she'll destroy the deed you found. She'll erase my family from history," Edward said, his voice trembling. "We need to get to that boiler first," Arthur said. "But we can't go through the basement. Silas and Beatrice's driver are watching the stairs. We have to use the one path they don't know about." Arthur looked at the window, then at the massive oak tree outside. The branches reached out like fingers, some of them touching the roof of the old carriage house. "We're going through the attic." The attic of Silver Oak was a forest of dust-covered beams and forgotten memories. Arthur and Edward moved slowly, their flashlights cutting through the thick cobwebs. The air was hot and stagnant, smelling of dry wood and old insulation. "The journal says there's a maintenance hatch near the main chimney," Arthur whispered. They found it hidden under a pile of old rugs. It was a heavy iron plate set into the floor. Arthur used his crowbar to pry it open. Below them was a narrow, vertical ladder that descended into the darkness of the living machine. As Arthur began to climb down, he heard a sound that made him stop. It was the sound of a match being struck. Then, the smell of expensive tobacco wafted up the shaft. He looked down. 2 floors below, on a small metal catwalk, stood Beatrice's driver. He was holding a flashlight and looking at a series of valves on the side of the massive chimney. He wasn't just a driver. He was an engineer. He was checking the pressure gauges. "They're going to light it," Arthur hissed to Edward above him. "They're going to fire up the old boiler to force the copper heart to open." "But the pipes are old," Edward whispered back. "If they build up too much steam, the whole north wing will collapse." Arthur realized the stakes had changed. Beatrice wasn't just a greedy relative. She was willing to destroy the hotel to get what was inside. He watched as the driver turned a heavy iron wheel. A low, groaning sound began to vibrate through the metal ladder. It was the sound of water rushing into ancient, thirsty pipes. "We have to stop him," Arthur said. "Edward, go back to the lobby. Find Chef Miller. Tell him to cut the main water line from the outside. I'm going down there." "Arthur, it's too dangerous." "Just do it. If that boiler hits full pressure, we all lose." Arthur climbed down the ladder with a speed he hadn't used in years. His heart hammered against his ribs. He reached the catwalk just as the driver began to climb down toward the sub-basement. Arthur stepped out into the light of the driver's flashlight. "That's far enough," he said, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. The driver turned. He didn't look surprised. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, professional-grade wrench. "Mr. King, you really should have taken the train." The catwalk groaned under the weight of the two men. Arthur King stood his ground, the metal crowbar heavy in his grip. Opposite him, the driver, a man whose name Arthur now knew was Victor, tightened his hold on the heavy iron wrench. The air was thick with the scent of hot oil and the growing hiss of escaping steam. "You're an investigator, Arthur. You should know when a case is closed," Victor said, his voice flat. He lunged forward, swinging the wrench in a wide, lethal arc. Arthur ducked, the metal whistling inches above his head. He countered with a low strike from the crowbar, catching Victor's shin. The driver grunted in pain but didn't fall. He was younger and stronger, fueled by a desperate loyalty to Beatrice. "This isn't just about a building," Victor spat, recovering his balance. "It's about what the Thorne family stole from the Vanes. My family built this hotel, stone by stone, while the Thornes sat in their counting houses." Arthur realized then that Victor wasn't just an employee. He was a descendant of Silas Vane, the architect. The grudge went back generations. As they circled each other, a loud shriek echoed from below. Arthur glanced at the pressure gauge attached to the main chimney. The needle was trembling violently in the red zone. The steam pressure $p$ was rising rapidly as the water in the ancient pipes heated toward a flashpoint. "You're going to kill us both, Victor," Arthur shouted over the roar. "The pipes can't handle this. The stress on the metal is exceeding its yield strength. If I can't have the copper heart, no one will." Victor roared, lunging again. This time, he tackled Arthur, and both men went over the edge of the catwalk. They plummeted 10 feet, crashing into a massive pile of discarded coal in the sub-basement. The soot exploded into a black cloud, blinding them. Arthur rolled to his feet, coughing, his eyes stinging. He could hear Victor scrambling nearby. Through the haze, the massive iron boiler loomed like a prehistoric beast, its seams glowing a dull, angry orange. The thermal pulse mentioned in the journal was no longer a metaphor. It was a physical threat. Arthur scrambled out of the coal pile, his lungs burning. He could see Victor heading for the main furnace door, a heavy iron lever in his hand. If Victor opened the draft completely, the fire would become uncontrollable. "Miller! Cut the water!" Arthur yelled, hoping the sound would carry up the shafts to where Edward and the chef were. Suddenly, the hotel vibrated with a deep, bone-shaking vibration. A pipe near the ceiling burst, sending a jet of scalding white steam into the room. Victor screamed as the heat grazed his arm, dropping the lever. He vanished into the white mist, retreating toward the dark corners of the sub-basement. Arthur knew he had to act fast. He remembered the diagram from the architect's journal. The pressure must be released through the heart to find the truth. He looked at the boiler. There were 3 heavy brass valves arranged in a triangle on the front of the copper heart, a spherical chamber at the center of the boiler's pipe network. He ran to the boiler, the heat radiating off the metal like a physical wall. The first valve was stuck. He used the crowbar as a lever, praying the ancient metal wouldn't snap. With a heavy mechanical sound, the valve turned. A burst of black water sprayed out, followed by a low whistle. The second valve required a sequence. Arthur remembered the tapping he had heard in the pipes. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. He turned the valve in that rhythm. Inside the boiler, gears began to turn. It was a clockwork mechanism, hidden within the plumbing. The living machine was waking up. But as the third valve loosened, Arthur felt a cold presence behind him. He didn't turn around. He knew the feeling of a gun barrel pressed against the back of his neck. "Move away from the heart, Mr. King," Beatrice Thorne Vance said, her voice silk-smooth despite the chaos. She had descended into the sub-basement, looking pristine even in the soot-filled air. Arthur slowly raised his hands, the crowbar clattering to the stone floor. Beatrice stood before him, a small, silver-plated revolver held with practiced ease. Behind her, Victor emerged from the shadows, his arm wrapped in a torn piece of his grey uniform. "You've done the hard work for us, Arthur," Beatrice said, her eyes fixed on the copper heart. "The mechanism is engaged. My grandfather's legacy is finally within reach." "Your legacy is a bomb, Beatrice," Arthur warned. "The pressure is still building. Opening that chamber now will release thousands of pounds of steam directly into this room. A risk I am willing to take," she replied. She gestured to Victor. "Open it." Victor hesitated, looking at the vibrating pipes, but under Beatrice's cold gaze, he stepped forward and gripped the final valve. He gave it a desperate, heavy turn. Instead of an explosion of steam, there was a deep, rhythmic pulse. The massive boiler shifted on its stone base. A section of the floor, covered in decades of coal dust and red clay, began to sink. It wasn't a room opening, it was a hydraulic elevator. The four of them, Arthur, Beatrice, Victor, and the trembling boiler, lowered slowly into a hidden level. This was the sub-basement, a chamber carved directly into the red clay bedrock. The air here was cool and damp, smelling of ancient earth. As the platform stopped, the flashlight beams illuminated walls lined with copper plates. At the far end of the room stood a simple wooden desk and a safe made of solid brass. "The Vane Archive," Victor whispered, his anger momentarily replaced by awe. Beatrice moved toward the safe, but Arthur noticed something on the ground. Footprints. Fresh ones. They were smaller than a man's, leading from the back of the chamber into a dark tunnel that shouldn't have been there. "We aren't the only ones down here," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. Beatrice ignored Arthur's warning, her focus entirely on the brass safe. "Victor, the key. The one with the red ribbon you took from the cabin." Victor handed her the key. As she inserted it into the lock, a low, mechanical growl echoed through the copper-lined room. It wasn't coming from the safe. It was coming from the walls. The copper heart isn't just a safe, Arthur realized, looking at the copper plates. It's a conductor. Suddenly, the copper plates began to glow with a faint, blue light. A hum filled the air, so low it made Arthur's teeth ache. The living machine was an early form of a massive battery, powered by the thermal energy of the boiler above and the mineral-rich red clay below. The dark tunnel at the back of the room erupted with a sudden, brilliant light. A figure stepped out, a woman in a tattered red coat, her hair wild and her eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. "Elena!" Arthur gasped. But it wasn't the Elena he knew. She was carrying a heavy, leather-bound satchel, and in her hand, she held a remote detonator. "The Vanes and the Thorns. You all think you own this history," Elena said, her voice echoing with a strange, hollow quality. "But I am the daughter of the woman you erased." Lydia Vance wasn't George Thorne's wife. She was the architect's sister, and she was the one who actually designed the pulse. Beatrice froze, the safe door halfway open. "You, the art collector. You were a plant. I was the reclamation," Elena said. "This hotel was built on a lie. The Morning Oak isn't just a painting. It's a map to the explosive charges I've placed in the foundation. If the Vanes can't have the credit, the Thorns won't have the stones." Arthur saw the needle on the detonator. She was waiting for the boiler pressure to hit its peak. The explosion wouldn't just destroy the hotel. It would cause a massive sinkhole in the red clay, swallowing everything. The copper room hummed with static electricity, making everyone's hair stand on end. Arthur looked from the brass safe to Elena and the detonator. He had seconds to act. "Elena, Listen to me, Arthur said, taking a cautious step forward. Lydia Vance didn't design this to be a tomb. She designed it to be a heart. If you blow this place up, you destroy the only proof that she ever existed. The archive in that safe. It contains her original blueprints. Her name is on them. Elena's thumb trembled over the button. They'll just bury it again. The Thorns always do. Not this time. Arthur promised. I have the deed. I have the journal. The world is going to know that a woman designed the most complex building of the 20th century. Inside the brass safe, a small bell chimed. The door swung open. Instead of gold or jewels, the safe was packed with rolls of blue vellum, architectural plans. At the top of the pile was a photograph of a woman standing in front of the half-finished silver oak. She looked exactly like Elena. Victor moved, not toward Beatrice, but toward Elena. She's right. Elena. My grandfather's notes. They always spoke of the sister. He didn't build this alone. He couldn't have. Beatrice lunged for the plans, her greed outweighing her fear. They are mine. They belong to the trust. Victor blocked her path, his heavy wrench held low. No, Beatrice. They belong to history. The boiler above let out a final, deafening roar. A massive crack appeared in the ceiling. Water began to pour in, dousing the glowing copper plates. The thermal pulse was collapsing. We have to go. Now! Arthur shouted. Elena looked at the photograph in the safe, then at the detonator. With a sob, she threw the device into the rising water. Arthur grabbed the rolls of vellum and stuffed them into his coat. He grabbed Edward's arm, who had just appeared at the top of the sinking platform, and pulled everyone toward the hydraulic lift. The platform began to rise just as the sub-basement began to cave in. They ascended into the black soot of the sub-basement, leaving the copper heart to be buried once more. But this time, the truth was in Arthur's hands. The hydraulic platform shuddered to a halt in the sub-basement. Above them, the grand structure of silver oak let out a series of deep, metallic groans. The thermal pulse had been disrupted, and the sudden cooling of the pipes was causing the metal to contract violently. Arthur pushed the group off the platform just as a final surge of steam hissed from a cracked fitting. Get to the main stairs, Arthur commanded. He looked back to see Beatrice Thornvance slumped against a crate, her fur coat ruined and her eyes wide with shock. Victor stood over her, no longer the loyal driver, but a man who had found his own history. The building is settling, Arthur noted, observing the cracks forming in the stone pillars. He calculated the structural stress mentally. The stability of the north wing was now a variable of the cooling rate. If the temperature dropped too quickly, the brittle ductile transition of the old iron supports could lead to a catastrophic failure. They scrambled up the stairs, Edward Thorne leading the way with a newfound energy. When they burst into the lobby, they were met by Chef Miller and 2 local police officers. The lobby was a scene of chaos. Dust filtered down from the ornate ceiling, and the morning oak painting vibrated against the wall. Is everyone out? Miller shouted over the din. We're the last, Arthur said, clutching the vellum rolls to his chest. He turned to the officers. Secure the perimeter. The sub-basement is a sinkhole hazard, and I believe you have several statements to take from Ms. Thornvance regarding the endangerment of this property. Beatrice was led away in silence, her icy composure finally shattered. But Elena, or whoever she truly was, stayed back. She stood near the fireplace, the warmth of the small fire reflecting in her tired eyes. The blueprints, she whispered to Arthur. Are they clear? They are more than clear, Elena, Arthur said softly. They are a masterpiece. By 2 a.m., the hotel had finally stopped groaning. The engineers called in by the police had stabilized the boiler, and the threat of collapse had passed. Arthur, Edward, and Elena sat in the library, the only room that felt safe from the night's ghosts. Arthur spread the vellum blueprints across the large oak table. Under the bright electric lamps, the lines of ink were vibrant, almost glowing. These weren't just floor plans, they were a synthesis of art and physics. Look at the way the heat was designed to move, Arthur pointed out. He traced a line from the boiler to the attic. Lydia Vance used a principle of thermodynamics that wouldn't be formalized for years. She treated the building as a closed system where entropy was minimized through the use of the red clay's thermal mass. Arthur explained. She was balancing the entire hotel's temperature to keep the archives perfectly preserved. It wasn't just a safe. It was a climate-controlled vault built 50 years before the technology existed. Elena reached out, her fingers hovering just above the signature in the corner. L. Vance. Architect. She had to hide her name. My grandmother told me Lydia was the ghost designer for her brother Silas. He got the contracts, but she provided the soul. And the morning oak painting, Edward added, was her way of telling us where the heart was. But there's more, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at a small, faint symbol in the margins of the attic plan. It was a small bird, a kingfisher, drawn in invisible ink that had only become visible due to the heat of the boiler. There is a room 13 on these plans. But I've walked every inch of the guest floors. There is no room 13. The library grew quiet as Arthur focused his flashlight on the room 13 marker. In the hotel's current layout, the numbering skipped from 12 to 14 to avoid the unlucky number. Most guests assumed it was a simple superstition of the early 1900s. If the room isn't in the hallway, Arthur mused, it must be between the hallways. He measured the distance on the blueprint. According to the scale, there was a gap of nearly 8 feet between the back walls of room 12 and room 14. In the actual building, that space was thought to be a thick structural column for the chimneys. It's a blind room, Elena said. A common feature in houses used for smuggling or hiding during the wars. But why put it in a hotel? Arthur turned the blueprint over. On the back, written in a very fine, elegant script, was a list of names. Thorne, Vance, Gable, Miller, and next to each name was a set of coordinates and a date. These aren't just names, Arthur said. These are the families that have served or owned Silver Oak. And look at the last entry. The last entry was dated January 8, 2026. Today's date. Next to it was a single word. Exchange. The exchange. Edward whispered. My father used to talk about the great exchange that would happen when the hotel was in its darkest hour. I thought he was talking about money or the deed. But what if it's something physical? Arthur stood up, his mind racing. The person who left the lily at my door, the person who warned me to leave, they weren't trying to stop the investigation. They were trying to protect the exchange. And if today is the day, then whoever is behind this is still in the building. He grabbed his crowbar. We need to find room 13. Now. Arthur led the way to the second floor. He stood between the doors of room 12 and room 14. He tapped the wall. It sounded solid, like heavy masonry. But he knew from the blueprints that the wood mentioned in the letter referred to the wainscoting that ran along the entire hallway. He knelt down and began to examine the oak panels. He looked for the same acorn-shaped lever he had found in the library. After several minutes of searching, he found something different, a small, circular indentation in the wood, exactly the size of Mr. Thorne's silver pocket watch. Edward, the watch, Arthur said. Edward handed him the broken silver watch. Arthur pressed the face of the watch into the indentation and turned it. There was a series of heavy, mechanical clicks behind the wall, the sound of counterweights shifting. A section of the wall, 3 panels wide, swung inward with a ghostly silence. Behind it was not a room, but a small, circular study. The air inside was remarkably fresh, circulated by a hidden vent that led to the oak tree outside. The room was filled with shelves, but they didn't hold books. They held hundreds of small, glass jars. Each jar contained a different colored soil or mineral, and in the center of the room sat a single, modern laptop, its screen glowing in the dark. A laboratory? Elena asked, stepping into the room. In the middle of a hotel. Arthur walked to the laptop. The screen was open to a global commodities market. It was tracking the price of rare earth minerals. Specifically, the minerals found in red clay. The hotel isn't just a building or a safe. Arthur realized, his voice tight. It's a refinery. The boiler system, the copper plates, they weren't just for a battery. They were being used to extract something from the soil beneath the hotel. Suddenly, the laptop beeped. A message appeared on the screen. Extraction complete. Transferring funds. The group stood paralyzed as the numbers on the screen began to climb. Millions of dollars were being transferred into an encrypted offshore account. Someone has been using the hotel's mechanical system to mine the ground secretly, Arthur said. That's why the boiler was being pushed to its limit. It wasn't Beatrice or Gable. They were just distractions. Useful idiots who thought they were fighting over a deed. But who has the technical knowledge to run a refinery from inside a wall? Edward asked. Arthur looked at the jars of minerals. He saw one jar that was labeled sample 402. 402 was a room number. He remembered the guest list from the first day. The old man, Arthur said. The one who was always reading the newspaper in the dining room. He never spoke, never complained. He just watched. He turned to the shadow in the corner of the room. He hadn't noticed it before because it was so still. A man sat in a high-backed leather chair, his face obscured by the darkness. He held a newspaper in his lap, but he wasn't reading. "Good evening, Mr. King," a dry, rasping voice said. The man leaned forward into the light. It wasn't the old man from the dining room. It was a man who looked exactly like the portrait of George Thorne, but younger, his face untouched by the decades that should have passed. "I see you found my workshop," the man said. "I must say, your progress was much faster than I anticipated. The veins were always so slow to catch on." "Who are you?" Edward demanded, his voice shaking. The man smiled, revealing teeth that were far too white. "I am the reason this hotel exists. Edward. I am the living part of the machine. And I'm afraid the exchange I planned for today involves a bit more than just mineral rights. It involves the total vacancy of Silver Oak." He reached for a small silver bell on the desk. "Shall we call for service?" The man in the leather chair stood up slowly. He looked like a living ghost, a perfect fusion of the Thorne and Vance bloodlines. He introduced himself as Julian Thorne II, the lost architect. He claimed to be the grandson of the original George Thorne and Lydia Vance, born from a secret union that the history books had scrubbed away. "You call it mining, Mr. King," Julian said, walking toward the jars of glowing minerals. "I call it harvesting. This land is unique. The red clay contains a rare isotope of palladium variant that shouldn't exist in this concentration. My grandmother discovered it while building the foundations. She didn't just build a hotel, she built a giant sieve." Arthur looked at the jars. The minerals were pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. He realized the thermal pulse wasn't just for heating. It was a low-frequency vibration used to shake the isotopes loose from the soil. "The exchange isn't just money," Arthur said, connecting the final dots. "You're selling the isotope to a private energy firm. The millions on that screen are the down payment for a substance that can power a city, or level 1. And the hotel?" Edward asked, his voice trembling. "What happens to the people here?" "The hotel has served its purpose," Julian replied coldly. "The extraction has reached its limit. To get the final, most concentrated batch. I must push the boiler to a critical state. It will create a vacuum in the sub-basement. Silver Oak will simply vanish into the earth. No evidence. No witnesses. Just a tragic geological event. Arthur noticed the laptop was hardwired into the copper walls. He needed to disrupt the signal. He looked at the jars of palladium and remembered his basic chemistry. Palladium is a powerful catalyst, especially for hydrogen. If he could introduce a gas into the system, he might be able to create a feedback loop. Arthur stepped toward the desk, his hands open to show he wasn't carrying a weapon. He needed to stall for time while he calculated the frequency required to shatter the glass jars. "Julian, you're an engineer," Arthur said, his voice steady. "You know that the red clay is the only thing holding the weight of the north wing. If you create a vacuum, the pressure differential will be too great. The hotel won't just sink, it will implode before you can escape with the laptop." Julian laughed. "I have a pressurized exit through the old well. I'll be long gone before the foundation gives way." "What about Elena?" Arthur asked, gesturing to the woman standing beside him. "She's your kin. She carries the Vance name." Julian glanced at Elena, his expression unreadable. A minor casualty for a major advancement. Elena's face hardened. She reached into her red coat and pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a detonator this time. It was the silver pocket watch Arthur had returned to Edward. She had modified it with a small, vibrating motor from her notebook. "You forgot one thing, Julian," Elena said. "Lydia didn't just build the sieve. She built a kill switch." She pressed a button on the watch. A high-pitched whine filled the room. The glass jars began to vibrate. The blue light within them flickered wildly. Julian rushed toward her, but Victor, who had been silent in the doorway, intercepted him with a heavy shoulder tackle. The first jar shattered, spilling the glowing dust onto the floor. The laptop screen began to glitch, the numbers spinning into infinity. The secret study began to tilt. Outside the walls, the sound of rushing earth echoed like thunder. The extraction process had been halted, but the damage to the geography was done. The vacuum Julian had mentioned was forming, not by design, but by accident. "The soil is liquefying," Arthur shouted. "We have 3 minutes." He grabbed the rolls of vellum blueprints from the desk and stuffed them into Elena's hands. "Take these. They are the only record of the Vance legacy. Victor, get Edward out through the hallway." "What about you?" Edward cried, grabbing Arthur's arm. "I have to wipe that laptop," Arthur said. "If that data reaches the firm, they'll just come back and dig up the whole valley." "Go." Victor hauled Edward through the secret door. Elena hesitated, looking at Arthur. "Don't be a hero, King. Be an investigator." She turned and vanished into the hallway just as a massive crack split the ceiling of room 13. Arthur lunged for the laptop. He didn't have time to hack the encryption. He grabbed the metal crowbar and smashed the screen, then ripped the hard drive from the chassis. The copper walls were now glowing red-hot as the remaining energy in the system discharged. The floor dropped a foot. Arthur scrambled toward the secret exit. He could see the lobby through the gap in the wall. The grand chandelier was swinging wildly, and dust was everywhere. He saw Chef Miller ushering the last of the kitchen staff out the front doors. Arthur leaped through the secret opening just as the study collapsed into the darkness below. He didn't look back. He ran through the lobby, the floorboards snapping beneath his feet like dry twigs. Arthur reached the front porch of Silver Oak just as the north wing began to slide into the earth. It was a slow, majestic, and terrifying sight. The stone walls, which had stood for over a century, crumbled like sand. He saw Elena, Edward, Victor, and Chef Miller standing by the old oak tree. They were safe. But Julian Thorne too was nowhere to be seen. He had likely gone for his private exit in the well, unaware that the well had been the first thing to collapse during the storm. "Arthur! Over here!" Edward screamed. Arthur ran toward them, the ground behind him literally disappearing. He reached the roots of the massive oak tree just as the front entrance of the hotel folded inward. The mourning oak painting, still hanging on its reinforced wall, was the last thing he saw before the lobby was swallowed by the red clay. The dust cloud was immense, a thick curtain of red and grey that blotted out the sun. For a long time, there was only the sound of falling stones and the heavy breathing of the survivors. When the dust finally settled, Silver Oak was gone. In its place was a deep, circular crater filled with red mud. Only the chimney of the south wing remained, standing like a lonely tombstone. The massive oak tree, however, hadn't moved an inch. Its roots, deeper and stronger than any human foundation, had held the ground together where the humans stood. "It's over," Elena whispered, clutching the blueprints. "He's gone. The machine is buried." Arthur looked at the hard drive in his hand. The machine is gone, but the truth is still here. The following morning, the valley was silent. The local authorities had cordoned off the site, labeling it a catastrophic sinkhole event due to historical mining. The truth about the isotope and Julian Thorne too remained a secret shared only by the 5 survivors. Arthur stood at the edge of the crater. He had spent the night with Edward and Elena at a small inn in the nearby village. They had a plan. The blueprints. Elena would present the Vance blueprints to the International Architectural Society. Lydia Vance would finally receive her posthumous credit. The land. Edward Thorne still owned the land. He decided to turn the site into a public park, a memorial to the mourning oak. The hard drive. Arthur had destroyed the data. The energy firm would find nothing but a hole in the ground and a series of legal lawsuits from the estate. The survivors. Victor and Chef Miller decided to open a small bistro in town, named the Copper Heart. Edward walked up to Arthur, handing him a small, wrapped package. "I found this in the grass near the tree. I think it belongs to you." Arthur opened it. It was the silver pocket watch. It was broken beyond repair, the glass gone and the gears crushed. But inside the back cover, a new inscription had been scratched into the metal. "For Arthur King, the man who saw through the stone. What will you do now, Arthur?" Edward asked. Arthur looked at the horizon where the sun was rising over the hills, just as it had in Julian Vance's painting. "I think I'm ready for that retirement now," he said with a tired smile. "No more hotels. No more basements. Just a quiet house with no secret rooms." He turned and walked toward the train station. He was a retired investigator once more, but as he felt the heavy weight of the watch in his pocket, he knew that the mystery of Silver Oak would stay with him forever. The building was gone, but the story of the woman in the red coat, the architect in the shadows, and the heart made of copper would live on in the red clay of the valley.